All right, so Commonwealth Games will be happening. That's the good news. The not so good news, or a terrible piece of news if you are an Indian sport follower, is that half a dozen sports in which India won medals in the last edition of the Commonwealth Games in 2022 have been axed from the 2026 edition. And these include some of the major sports where India excel not just in the CWG but beyond it too, the Asian Games, even the Olympics now. And जैसे हम imagine कर सकते हैं, immediate backlash शुरू हो गया है saying we should boycott Commonwealth Games to who even cares about it. To discuss that, to actually, figure out whether we care about the Commonwealth Games, we'll dedicate an entire episode to the games itself. Sitting across me, Mihir Vasavda is the man who was on ground at the previous edition of the CWG, taking a close look at some of the record medal performances that India came up with. Amit Kamath, he is in fact back from Scotland, the country that will be hosting the games in a couple of years. और Amit के आते ही conspiracy against India शुरू हो गई. Amit, welcome to Game Time after a long absence.
Thanks, Mihir. Just to clarify, this dropping of sports has nothing to do with me. Now that Mihir has basically tiptoed around the fact and laid the groundwork for trying to say that I had something to do with it, I don't.
In journalism, there is a golden rule, right? Denial is the first confirmation. So there we have it.
I had never heard of this rule. So I'm going to say I can neither confirm nor deny it. But anyway, the point is that we've heard a lot of people talk about this, Mihir. You had somebody like a Gopi Chand coming out and saying, you had somebody like a Gagan Naran coming and saying that. Is there a point to the Commonwealth Games even? Should we be sending a team? Should we be bothering about the Commonwealth Games? Because, the one thing about the Commonwealth Games is that it also comes on the same time as the Asian Games on the calendar in the year. So maybe we shouldn't be focusing too much on the Commonwealth Games. That's a train of thought, which we will be talking about. But first, Mihir, as somebody who has been to a Commonwealth Games before, what is your opinion of the Commonwealth Games as a whole, as a concept?
It's a fun concept. We don't take it seriously. We know it that much in terms of the performances. Some of the performances, like something like an Avinash Sable, of course, is taken seriously. But then wrestling, for example, isn't. So you have to kind of horses for courses wala scene hai. If we look at the sports that have been culled from the 26th edition, some of them are important, in fact. The 6 sports where India won medal in 22 and are not there in 26 is badminton, cricket, hockey, squash, table tennis and wrestling. Now, these sports combined for 37 out of the 61 medals that India won. अब यार इसमें हम अगर जो देखें तो wrestling का competition level is very low. So even like to get into the Indian team is perhaps tougher. We've discussed this a lot before. So, ठीक है, मतलब not a lot is lost over there. TT, it's interesting. Like, it's not so one-sided, but India is a strong presence there. But you have countries like Singapore who are good as well. Same goes for badminton. Malaysia, Singapore, these countries are pretty strong. Canada even has a few players. Britain too has a few good names there. Cricket is strong in the Commonwealth. Cricket is essentially a Commonwealth sport. So, usme competition level is serious. Squash is again very big in the Commonwealth. Pakistan, Malaysia, Britain, Scotland, all these countries have really good players there. And hockey, again, like cricket, is almost a Commonwealth sport. Not, as heavy as cricket, but really good competition across the Commonwealth. The fact that India haven't won a gold medal there just goes to show how tough it is to medal at the CWG. So from a sporting point of view, like there are easy and not so easy sports. So it makes total sense. If you ask athletes, I'm sure they'd like to go. As journalists, we like to go there and cover. We've had our experiences. 2018, when I went for the Gold Coast CWG, it was a brilliant atmosphere in the city. Nice host place, right on the beach. It was very casual, friendly vibes. It isn't as high pressure as the Olympics, but not as frivolous as well as some of the other games. Birmingham कैसा था यार?
Birmingham, I think, had a very chilled out vibe in a sense. And I don't think the word chilled out has been used in context of Birmingham ever in life. So that's rare. But I think when we were at Birmingham in 2022, the last Commonwealth Games, as you mentioned, it was almost like a carnival atmosphere. It wasn't so serious also. Like at the Olympics, you see athletes have a completely different visage. Their face completely looks different when they are competing at the Olympics. They are always at the edge of their seats. They're always tensed, nervous, all of it. But you look at the Commonwealth Games and everybody. I remember I was at the badminton arena at one stage, and I think Chirag and Satvik were having way too much fun than they should have been. And at some point, Matthias Bo had to basically rebuke them and tell them that you have a match tomorrow. Go back, stop letting your hair down so much, like thoda seriousness rakho and all that. See, that's the thing. I think in Commonwealth Games, it's very, very slightly difficult also to be that serious. I know medals matter maybe for the self-worth of a lot of athletes, because you look at the Olympics, 7 medals is the best that we've ever done. Last Olympics mein humko 6 medals aaye the. So the rest of the whatever 100 odd athletes that go to Olympics after Olympics, for them, the Commonwealth Games is something that will be on the top of their CV, because they will be an Olympian, but they will also be a multiple-time Commonwealth Games medalist. So for us, Commonwealth Games, for athletes per se, the Commonwealth Games has always been like a marker of sorts. But being serious is another question altogether. Like, it's a very carnival atmosphere in a sense.
It's friendly games, as they call it. Now, like you mentioned, Satvik Chirag. Now, the example that came to my mind was at 2018. I think Sushil Kumar, it was his like farewell in a way on the big stage, right? And हमें जो सुशील कुमार का एक चेहरा हमेशा दिखा, it's always like very game face. Yeah. And like whenever we've gone to Chhatrisal where he trained, he was like always high intensity training sessions. So we've never seen him chill, so to say. But at Gold Coast, I remember like one evening he was at the beach with his wife, his father-in-law, his kid. And that is something that I don't think you'll see many athletes do in middle of the games. And similarly, say for example, Saina Nehwal. I remember there was this big controversy around her father staying in the village with her back then. Yeah. And after the first round match, I just caught up with Saina and she was happy to talk for around half an hour. And anyone who's been around the games as a spectator, as a journalist, as athletes, they'll know that if it was a serious event, you wouldn't spend half hour talking to a journalist after your first round match. You'll immediately go back, you'll be focusing on the next match and preparing for all those things. Yeah. So that also kind of gives an insight to how seriously the athletes have taken it. And in a way, that's also reflected in how the host cities have started to perceive these games, because they have started to realize that top athletes don't always come for these games. And at Birmingham, I think you could have perhaps seen this coming in the sense that the crisis, right? Because the 2022 games, जो Birmingham में हुए, were originally supposed to be held in Durban. And Durban said कि हमारे पास पैसे नहीं, हम नहीं कर पाएंगे. And then they had to kind of scramble and Birmingham stepped in. The 26 games were supposed to be held in Victoria, the Australian state. And they also said कि नहीं हमारे पास पैसे नहीं, हमें नहीं करना है. And then like literally rescue deal में Glasgow आ गया, who said if we have to do it, we'll just do it with these 10 sports. Yeah. So I guess you could have seen that coming in 22.
We did, but an event like the Commonwealth Games is also a testing ground for newer theories, right? These same conversations that we are having about the Commonwealth Games, we also kind of can extend it to the Olympics, because the Olympics have also become such a big party that not a lot of countries can fiscally afford to host them, just like the Commonwealth Games. The only reason why you would want to host an Olympics but not the Commonwealth Games is you have the best in the world. You have the Americas, the Chinas, all of them coming. Whereas in, I think at the Commonwealth Games, you only probably will have England
as great. The colonies, yeah.
Yeah, the colonies. So, of course, there is that. But then, at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, we saw something like multiple game villages where athletes from certain sports were staying in one part, athletes from other sports were staying in different parts. And those were the kind of things that Olympic hosts, future hosts can kind of do to cut costs. Like rather than having all of your staying in one big, massive, giant megapolis, then which you have to sell and whatever, you can probably have them housed in different places. Like, these unique sort of solutions. Birmingham Commonwealth Games was a testing ground for that. Obviously, I mean, sometimes things don't work out, which makes sense, completely makes sense. But Mihir, I think for a lot of nations around the world, like you look at something like a Nui, like very, very tiny nation. It's a landmass of, I think, 250, 260 square kilometers. It has a population of 1,600 people. But I don't think they've ever been to an Olympics. But they've been to every single Commonwealth Games over the last couple of years. Like, one of the fascinating things I saw at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games about a country like Nui was, initially, their chief source of revenue was basically the sale of postage stamps to foreign collectors. And they would get a lot of grants from New Zealand. Or you had somebody like a Tuvalu. You will probably have difficulty spotting that country over the map. Tuvalu ka main source of income is basically selling the .tv suffix to websites. That is what the country makes money from. But those sorts of countries will send athletes to a Birmingham Commonwealth Games. Somebody like a Nauru, which is the third smallest country in the world. They had, I think, around 15 odd athletes at Birmingham.
Nauru is a great story, by the way, because again, like you mentioned, Tuvalu and Nui. Nauru, basically, they, in the Commonwealth, are a very strong weightlifting country. And how they fund the weightlifting program, I found it very fascinating. I came across it in 2018. So apparently, there was this time when they would kind of, sustain because of the bird droppings. So they had this, if I recall properly, I just kind of opened my report now. And so, like, I remember there's this figure. So around the mid 1970s, na, Financial Times ka ek report tha, where its GDP, Nauru's GDP was second only to Saudi Arabia. And this was first because of the phosphate reserves the country had.
Which was from the bird droppings.
Yeah. तभी से लेकर अब तक में अभी the country sustains itself by being this asylum sort of a thing for Australia. So basically those who are trying to enter Australia, the refugees, right, through boats. So Australia first sends them to screening centers in Nauru, where it has established its screening centers, and per person they screen, Australia pays Nauru a certain amount. A part of that amount is then spent on the weightlifting program, because that brings the whole country to this focus outside whatever they think is like the sporting attention that they crave for, right? So there is a Sydney Morning Herald report from 2017 जिसमें मतलब उनका ये था कि Australia वो paying up to 385 million Australian dollars to Nauru for this asylum program which they had, screening program they had. So these kind of stories there are replete, मतलब Commonwealth Games में बहुत ज़्यादा है. So for countries like these, of course the games matter a lot. I think it matters also a lot for the British countries, the home nations, right? This is the only place where they actually get to play as, say, Wales or Scotland and England, which at the Olympics they combine and play under the team GB. So for them it becomes important. For these small islands, India ke liye I'm not like too sure, because you have the Olympics and then you have the Asian Games, which is a serious business. So that's why this whole relevance wala debate comes across, I think, in India a lot.
Which is why, Mihir, I think if you look at what the government is doing, the government has very clearly set its sights on the 2036 Olympics and said that, that is something we want to host. But the Commonwealth Games, okay, sure, there is like that baggage of the last Commonwealth Games that we hosted and all the negative stories that it kind of garnered, which is why maybe they'd never wanted to get into hosting another games when Victoria pulled out. But you look at the other countries, you look at somebody like a Malaysia, which is also not too miserly in that sense. But even they didn't want to dip their toes into this warm puddle of whatever hosting rights for the 2026 Commonwealth Games. So that tells us a lot. That tells us that the future of these games is going to be not faster, higher, stronger, but much, much lighter and much, much tinier in a sense.
Like you had said, right? After the initial story that we had done, you had given it the phrase Commonwealth Games light. So if you ever read that phrase going forward, listeners, it's Amit Kamath who came up with that thing. But ये हो गया यार relevance वाला part. Now the thing is कि games हो रहे हैं.
But Mihir, sorry, just to interrupt. I think one stat I think we need to mention about Victoria. See, every big games, every multidisciplinary games जो भी host होते हैं, be it the Asian Games, Commonwealth Games, Olympics, all of them have some sort of budget when these guys decide to bid for it. And that budget like burgeons into something unwieldy by the end. All of us know that. But what happened with Victoria specifically was that when they had originally bid for it, they were thinking Australian dollars 2.6 billion tak cost ja sakta hai. By the time the year started coming closer, the Victoria Premier, Daniel Andrews, basically said that the cost had almost gone up to 7 billion Australian dollars, which was almost 3 times what they had initially factored in. So that is also one of the reasons. I don't know whether there is a whole other story to be done at why people anyway bid for it or undervalue it when they are bidding for it or when they are convincing their voters that we need. But yeah, there is a story there.
But the funny thing which Shashank, our producer, and I discussed in the 3 Things episode a couple of days ago is Australia miscalculated their whole budget, and because they pulled out of the hosting rights, they were made to pay a fine up to, I think, 100 million Australian dollars, something like that. That money is now being used to conduct the games in Scotland. So basically, Australia is still paying for the games that are being hosted in Scotland without a bunch of sports in it. So, I mean, it's a काफी messed up situation in that sense. But yeah, I was saying कि relevance वाला part तो एक तरफ हो गया. अभी games तो हो रहे हैं. 10 sports है. 10 sports where India doesn't really have a lot of pedigree apart from, say, athletics and para-athletics, boxing, lawn bowls. I mean, swimming, I don't know. Swimming, track cycling, gymnastics is where India won't be that strong. So we are essentially looking at athletics and para-athletics, boxing, bowls, weightlifting as 4 key sports where India can win medals. So the contingent size you would believe will be very small. And the number of medals will, अगर हम लोग straight minus कर ले तो 61 minus 37 will be 24 medals from the 22 edition जो इस बार India जीत सकते हैं. It is, I guess, Amit, a good time which India should have done maybe 20 years ago. But this is the time where I think the much needed push for sports like swimming, gymnastics, cycling, athletics even, जहाँ पर you have multiple medals on offer. I'm not saying कि आज शुरू करेंगे और 2026 में they'll start winning medals, but India eventually had to look at these sports. And if you look at it from the right mindset, so I think a leaner CWG can help India get stronger in these disciplines in the long term, assuming कि 2030, 34, 38 CWG होगा and it will be something like this.
Yeah, that is true. I think in a piece, our colleague Shivani has also kind of mentioned this, and she's very poignantly pointed at a country like Brazil and said that, Brazil used the Rio Olympics that it was hosting in 2016 to kind of raise their own athletes' standards in terms of athletics, in terms of gymnastics, in terms of swimming. And these are all games where one athlete can win more than one medal. In fact, in swimming and athletics, so one athlete to
7-8 medals. 7-8 medals, swimming at least.
Which is more than what India ka pura contingent wins in one games, right? So obviously it's much more difficult than just saying it. And मतलब हमारे तो बहुत time से we've been thinking this. So it's ऐसा नहीं है कि हमने कभी सोचा नहीं है. The Indian government has never thought about it, or the SAI or MYS has never thought about it. It has been thought about. But I think, as you're saying, this does give an opportunity, that final push for Indian sporting ecosystem to decide that, enough is enough. Now we need to also move into certain sports and focus more on them, because those are sports that are part of the multidisciplinary fabric more than anything else. These are you can call them the heartland Olympic sports, which are your athletics and swimming and maybe gymnastics. So,
we saw at the Tokyo Olympics and even at Paris, right? The whole pride and the place of privilege that these 3 sports enjoyed at the Olympics. Like, there was incredible interest in Simone Biles, for example, and the rush there was for gymnastics at these 2 games. Similar for swimming and athletics, so chalo, it is like the it is the queen of all events at the Olympics. And the fact that, even at the Commonwealth level, where the level of swimming is pretty high, like 3 very strong swimming countries, GB, Australia, South Africa, at least the ones that come to my mind, top of mind. Even Singapore is better than India in that sense. So very high quality swimming. It's, I think, time. And also, like you mentioned, the 2036 bid that India has. If India has to kind of seriously start looking at 2036, it needs to prepare athletes for that. And ek tarah se ye acha bahana bhi hai to do that.
Yeah, but Mihir, I think one last question before we wrap this up has to be what everybody is kind of like, at least the athletes and coaches jinka sport nikal gaya, they've raised. Should India completely boycott the Commonwealth Games? Because you see, this is a sentiment we also heard before Birmingham, because shooting was not there. And when shooting was not there, somebody like Jaspal Rana, who's, coached Manu Bhaker at to multiple medals at these ongoing, recently concluded Olympics, he kind of said that, why do we even need the Commonwealth Games? India should now look at much bigger targets. So, obviously, thoda sa emotional outburst tha, but I think now we are also getting a lot of coaches. Like, we are getting somebody like a Gagan Narang maybe, or a Pulela Gopichand saying that, should we look at...
So, ye jo statements are, should we compete at Commonwealth Games? It's coming from the people whose sports are not there at the Commonwealth Games. So, aap to वैसे भी नहीं जा रहे हो. So, none of the people, athletes, coaches, administrators whose sports are at the Commonwealth Games have ever raised a question on this. For the simple reason that, there are 2 things, right? A, you get to compete at a multidiscipline games. And we've known by experience that there is no other feeling that comes close to that. Even if it's like Commonwealth Games, it is like a very nice feel to be a part of multidiscipline events compared to a standalone, individual sport event. So that experience prepares you for something like an Olympics. So it is useful in that sense. You get kind of exposed to how the village life is, the whole complications and the uniqueness that a multidiscipline event brings along. तो आप उससे expose हो जाते हो. For a young athlete, it's a perfect kind of, a preparatory ground to then compete at the Olympics. So it can be looked at like that. The second, especially from an Indian sport point of view, an important factor is the financial bit. A medal you win at the CWG gets you good rewards from the central and state governments. And we shouldn't be kind of beating around the bush here, but for majority of Indian athletes, we've done that survey at the start of this year, and we know that a majority of the Indian athletes, the motivation for them to pick up a sport is to help their family get over the poverty line, right? So for them, it is a big deal. If you win a medal at the Commonwealth Games, the central government gives you 30 lakh for gold, 20 lakh for silver, 7.5 lakh for bronze. A state like Haryana has given, I think, 5 lakh or something, even for the fourth place finishers. And UP gave lakhs of rupees just to athletes from their state who competed at the Commonwealth Games. And सब लोग के लिए शायद ये लाइफ चेंजिंग सम नहीं होंगे, बट अगर जो मुझे 2 करोड़ रुपए 1 करोड़ रुपए मिल रहा है फॉर विनिंग अ गोल्ड मेडल एट द कॉमनवेल्थ गेम्स, आई वुडंट से इट्स इररेलेवेंट. सो या, आई मीन, आई डोंट सी द रीजन टू बॉयकॉट दीज गेम्स. आई मीन, if anything, I'll just kind of ramble on for a minute more. This also shows how weak India is in sports diplomacy. IOA keeps on fighting within their whole thing. I mean, we are recording this, और अब तक IOA का कोई statement नहीं आया on the whole CWG issue, whereas they are the ones responsible to send the team, send India's entries for games like these. And you look at India's sports administrators, they are busy infighting, most of them. They're trying to hold on to protect their chairs, whereas we know that in international sport, you have to lobby for your sport to be included, or if it's already there, to ensure that it remains. We could all see this coming. Like if 2022 if shooting and archery were not there, we knew that in 26 shooting once again had a problem, wrestling would have a problem. They had 4 years, or forget 4 years, even the last 2 years since Australia pulled out. They knew that, this would be a leaner games. They could have lobbied, they could have tried harder. So instead of crying ki hamare against conspiracy hai, I guess they can focus on lobbying harder. इतना जो बोल रहे हैं कि India is growing power and like it's important in the world sport and all, then you use that influence and ensure that your sports stay in the program.
Yeah, Mihir, I completely agree. I think I just feel that maybe the Commonwealth Games का legacy in itself is thoda sa abhi starting to that luster is kind of gone, like because it's obviously a relic of a colonial era that maybe we shouldn't put too much like if governments are paying money for success at the Commonwealth Games, they could just redirect that money elsewhere. Like they could probably ensure that more athletes go to something like a World Military Games for that matter, or go to a Asian Games, make sure that money is redistributed into different sports so that these guys, I think that can be done. Obviously, I'm not saying that we should completely boycott the Commonwealth Games, but I think this is a great push. Maybe we didn't need this push, but we are getting push for us to maybe realign our targets and say that, okay, fine, we are not going to bother too much about the Commonwealth Games. कोई sport होता है, ठीक है, नहीं हो रहा है, ठीक है. It doesn't matter too much to us.
Yeah, I think, that's like the fair summation of this whole thing. Before we call it a day, Shashank, Bhargava, producer, any words of wisdom on India's participation at the Commonwealth Games or the Commonwealth Games itself?
Or no pressure, Shashank, just words. कोई wisdom जरूरत नहीं.
या wisdom तो नहीं, words ही काफी हैं. But मैं ये बोल रहा हूँ कि हम कॉमनवेल्थ गेम्स को बॉयकॉट करने की बात कर रहे हैं. अरे हम इंग्लैंड को क्यों नहीं निकालते हैं? इंग्लैंड को बैन करना चाहिए. ऑल दीज कंट्रीज शुड गेट टुगेदर and should ban England. मतलब हम क्यों? Why should we get out of
But
these
Shashank,
games?
the problem is कि वही part of the world is continuing to host the Commonwealth Games.
I think that should be completely changed. Forget England. हम अपने आप से ही कुछ जुगाड़ ढूंढ लेंगे. We should all these countries that were colonized and oppressed, हमें ही कुछ solution ढूंढना चाहिए.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess you should lead that rebellion
मैं तो करने वाला हूँ
नोएडा में बैठ के.
अभी ये ग्लासगो हो जाने दो.
You know, Punjab में they host like a brilliant inter-village Olympics where they have like sports which are not mainstream, very traditional sports, and they have it over a period of days every year, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, we can have maybe something like the victims of colonization games.
And while we are discussing absolutely out of the book ideas, I think one country that we need to really take inspiration from, because we are discussing like really wild ideas, one country we really need to take inspiration from is Finland, which used to be a power in Olympic Games. And then they completely decided that, Olympics are pointless. So now Finland is a country which hosts the most unique world championships ever, like cell phone throwing world championship, wife carrying world championships.
Shashank, right down your alley.
Mobile phone throwing world championship, all sorts of world championships.
हमारे यहाँ तो बहुत मिल जाएंगे कैंडिडेट्स. गोल्ड मेडल्स ऑफ इंडिया ही हो जाएगा.
Finland is my ally. Finland will be my ally. Let me pull up some contacts.
Well, on that hopeful, very, very slightly delusionally hopeful Delulu note, this is us, me, Mihir and Shashank saying goodbye. If you stayed on for this long, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.